Good morning, everybody. It's lovely to be with all of you. It's a great privilege to be here. And the topic of the conversation this morning is really centers around trust and what we see in our world. And Herman was talking a little bit about it earlier when he came up on stage to talk about his pride of being a South African. But he was saying that against the backdrop of what's happening in this country. And what's happening in this country that many people are worried about. And that's not just particular to this country, but particular to, I spend most of my time now in the United States, in the US, and in Europe, and all over the world. And if we take a little step back and just take stock of where we are today, we're at a pivotal juncture in the evolution of humanity in historical terms. If we look at some of the challenges that we have today, just some of the things like Ukraine and Russia, Israel, Palestine, what happened a few days ago in Iran and Iraq, Iran and Pakistan, there's something happening in the world right now that we all feel. Many people that I talk to, it's not a time of tremendous excitement and kind of hope for the future of humanity. We have problems across the world. We see institutions of trust that have historically been the guiding lights of our society losing and betraying the trust of all of us as people around the world. Whether that's governments, whether that's financial authorities, whether that's religions, whether that's the media, there isn't any part of society that is immune from this breakdown of trust that we're seeing. If you go back into time, our identities as humans have been particularly determined by a few units. At the beginning, it was the family unit. Families feuded. Then they set aside their challenges at some point, and they became tribes. Those tribes feuded, set aside their differences at some point, became city-states. Those city-states feuded, set aside their differences, and ultimately we arrived at the nation-state, which is where the world is right now. But the nation-state's about 400 years old. It was established at the Conference of Westphalia in the 1600s. And right now, we're seeing the emergence of a new world order, a new paradigm that we're not there yet because we're still at the nation-state level. But the internet, that's only a few decades old, our recognition of the unity of the human race, that is something that's finally within reach. These things are piercing the nation-state boundary. But at each of these junctures of civilization turning a corner and moving its identity from a smaller state to a larger state, there comes a lot of friction, a lot of clashing between these forces of disintegration that we're currently seeing in full force and integration. And within that context, we see Bitcoin that's emerged. And we can look at Bitcoin as not just a financial or monetary thing, but we can actually look at Bitcoin as an organism that's 15 years old. And 15 years old at the prime of its adolescence. And it's gone through its kind of childhood, right? It's establishing itself. It's gone through some of the ugly things of adolescence that comes with that. But we're at the verge of moving beyond that adolescence into adulthood for Bitcoin and also adulthood for the world. And what I mean by that is that never before has the unity of the human race been within reach. Never before. We haven't had the technology for it, the communication, the financial system, etc. But now all of these things are coming together, the internet coming together, the ability to travel that's allowing all of us to be here from different parts of the world, and of course Bitcoin. And it's tremendously, tremendously important that we keep in mind that the next few years and decades are not going to be easy. So the last year, I think all of us felt in the Bitcoin community, those of us that have been involved in the community building, it's been a very tough year. But I think this year will be better, but I don't think that we should fool ourselves that the next few years and decades will be full of crisis and victory. Crisis and victory. Now, when we think about Bitcoin, I often talk about it juxtaposed to our current financial system. And a lot of us that are in Bitcoin right now, it's because of the trust that I talked about a little bit earlier that has been betrayed in many ways. And this is not a new story. It's happened in history many times in the past, and it will continue. But again, if you look at Bitcoin as a 15-year-old, and if you take the South African monetary system, the South African rand, does anybody know when it was established? Any takers? 1961, there we go. What day? So Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1961. So the rand is just over 60 years old. So an old being, an old organism, close to the end of its life. The US dollar in its current form, as we know, 1971 is when it was decoupled from gold. But what few people realize is that the Federal Reserve, conceivably the most important and powerful financial institution in the world, does anybody know when the Federal Reserve was established? 1913. We've got a very educated crowd here. 1913. So just over 100 years old. Now 100 years old is a blip in the concept of time in human history. And what most people don't know is that before this Federal Reserve, there were two other Federal Reserves that lasted for 20 years each before they were both closed down. So to think that the US dollar, forget about Bitcoin, but to think about the US dollar as a reserve currency of the world, and to think that it will last a very long time is an absolute fallacy. It's not debatable if you know your financial history that reserve currencies come and go. And if you think about the US dollar in its current state being just over 50 years old, and most fiat currencies globally, that's kind of the average, generally between 25 to 50 years of their existence. If you play it forward and you look at the debt to GDP levels and all the different things, the M2 money supply and the fact that 40% of money, the US dollars, were printed within a couple of years within COVID, you start to see things are changing in a very big way. So within this disintegration, there is integration, and that integration that I talked about with these technologies that are coming about. But it's not just about the technologies like the internet and Bitcoin. There's also an awakening within the human spirit around the world about who we are, which is not an identity based on a particular nation state any longer. It's not the identity just based on a race any longer. It's not the identity just based on any of these multiple facets that often divide us as humanity. But we're at the cusp of realizing and knowing that these differences that have divided us for so long are in the way of human progress and civilization. So, again, my name is Farzam Ehsani. I'm the co-founder and CEO of VALR, which is now the largest crypto exchange in South Africa and Africa by trading volume, by quite a long shot now. We're still customers, not as many as some of our competitors, and someone just came up to me and said, "This is the first time that I'm hearing about you here in South Africa." So we've got a long way to go, but I wanted to share a little bit about what we're doing in the spirit of the adopting Bitcoin theme of this conference. A, to share a little bit about what some institutions or exchanges are doing in this space, but also B, to call upon you to share in that vision, and I'll share a little bit about what I'm asking, and to perhaps change a little bit about what we think is okay and how we can move towards a world that serves humanity better. There are three things that I wanted to really talk about. Number one is this aspect of unity, which is very important. Number two is an aspect of service. And the last, again, to kind of recap my talk, will be about trust and truth. Unity is something at the bedrock of what we do at VALR and what we believe in. And that's why we love Bitcoin so much, is because Bitcoin is one of the first assets that really, it's not from a particular country on earth, it's not from a particular demographic or anything like that. But it's come from the world for every single human being out there. It does not discriminate, right? And this attitude of unity and looking at the world as unified is something that's drastically needed in our world, in our political system, in our economic system, etc. Without unity, we won't be able to progress. And there are certain things that we need to look into the mirror sometimes as a Bitcoin community, because there are times where we sow division in our discourses. So when we talk about us versus them, when we talk about the Bitcoiners versus the bankers, when you talk about those Bitcoiners versus the no-coiners, sometimes while we're having fun, and it's enjoyable maybe to crack a few jokes, we're actually retarding the progress of our own cause. And that's because if we truly believe that Bitcoin is here to progress humanity, to move us forward, then it's not just for Bitcoiners. It's for the world. And we cannot disparage those that don't quite understand it yet, those that are actually the haters of it, those that are the opponents of it. We have to welcome them. Because Bitcoin really is for everyone. So I used to be a banker, and someone was talking about my first podcast, which is in 2016 that I gave, and they said, you sounded good in the podcast, but you're a banker, and so I discarded you because what do bankers do? But we're at a juncture right now where banks and exchanges like VALR, etc., there is going to be emerging, conforming, where financial institutions will no doubt be involved in Bitcoin. Because if they don't, then they won't be part of the financial system of the future. And so it's a very important thing in our attitude, in our discourses, etc., is to have an open arms policy and to say, we'll talk to anybody that wants to help progress the state of humanity with us using Bitcoin as one of the tools that we can do. The second idea is service. We talk a lot about service at VALR, which is that there are tremendous divisions within humanity. The fact that we're all here today means that we're one of the privileged few in humanity that kind of get to sit in a safe place without worrying of any kind of physical violence to them, without worrying of whether it's the micro level, kind of on a human-to-human level, or a macro, which is nation-state levels. We're very privileged to be here. But what comes with that privilege and that knowledge about this technology and Bitcoin and what it can do for the world is a grave sense of responsibility to serve others, to welcome others, to present Bitcoin to them as you would a present to a king. And what I mean by that is that when we start trying to force our ideals down people's throats and having very acrimonious debates with people. Debating is good, don't get me wrong, but I'm talking about the attitude within which we do it, with courtesy, with respect. An attitude of service and an ethos of service needs to permeate everything we do, which is what we try to do at VALR, and I encourage all of us to ensure that's what we try to do when we leave out these doors. But the last thing, and probably the most important thing, is this aspect of trust and truth. Truth has become a negotiable commodity in the world today. Truth is something that's extremely difficult to come by today. I don't know about you, but now whenever I read the news, whenever I listen to a politician open their mouth, I don't know what to believe anymore. There used to be a time where it was published in the newspapers, and that was, there was some research there and some verification there, and so we thought that was the truth. But those days are long gone. So the amount of noise in society is so much compared to the truth that is singular. Multiple falsehoods, singular truth. And this idea of lying, and I say this also as a crypto exchange founder and CEO, which we've been burned very, very badly by the fact that there have been people in our industry and in the world where lying is a tool of the trade. And trust cannot be established without truth. And truth can obviously not be established if there are lies. So within VALR, within our organization, first of all, there's no tolerance for anything but the truth. As a co-founder, as a CEO, if there's any individual ever at VALR that doesn't give me the full truth, they have no place at VALR any longer. Why? Because we custody your money. And if I cannot have information that portrays the reality of a situation, I cannot fulfill my responsibility to our customers of being that custodian of theirs. Trust and truth, while they go hand in hand, are a little bit uncomfortable topics for the Bitcoin community, particularly within the don't trust, verify movement. And while that's absolutely true, well, we need to verify where we can, there's basic level of trust in society that we must have for society to function. If we don't have that basic level of trust, then we won't be able to sit at a restaurant and believe that we won't be poisoned. We won't be able to get onto a Boeing Max in a 737 and think that we'll be able to go somewhere safely. We have to trust that planes are serviced. Trust is breached. And when trust is breached, those are the perpetrators of that breach must be held accountable. Because if they're not accountable, then we move into a society of mob justice and vigilantism. I grew up in Kenya. I, unfortunately, with my own eyes, probably around the age of 6, saw someone in a local market that was effectively beaten to death because he was suspected of stealing. The society structures and police forces didn't work. And so the concept of justice devolved into the people, and there was no sense of justice. This individual's life was taken away from him. So there is this sense of that there's a basic level of trust that we need to have within society. And as an exchange, that's the most important thing that we have. Without trust, we don't have anything else. And so I wanted to leave you with this idea that every time we tell a lie, we incur a debt to truth. And sooner or later, that debt must be repaid. And so even when we convince ourselves that we tell a little lie, and that lie is, it doesn't harm anybody, it's a little white lie, and we think to ourselves that that's okay, that itself is a lie in itself. So my call upon all of you is to really think about this aspect of truth in your own personal lives. And to say, with my spouse, with my children, with my colleagues, with my friends, how comfortable am I with telling the truth or with telling a little fib? Because truthfulness is the foundation of all human virtues. And if we cannot be truthful in everything that we do, we don't have a chance of really transforming this world, allowing Bitcoin to actually manifest its beauty in all its aspects. Because there will be people that will require centralized wallets. I love the people that don't require that. That's fantastic. But if we have the vision of bringing Bitcoin to the masses, then we as a community need to ensure that we reestablish the integrity of who we are, which has been tarnished a great deal over the past year or two. And I hope you will join me in really thinking about whether even white lies are acceptable. To me, they're not. Every single time you say a lie, it chips at the foundation of society. And what we're trying to do is build a society where Bitcoin is a tool, but the social network between all of us as human beings is what will let that tool reach its highest potential. So with that, I want to wish you a lovely day. I'm off to the airport in just a few minutes. But thank you very much for having me. There's a great sense of responsibility on all of us in this room for the knowledge that we have about this and our ability to A, recognize the unity of the human race, B, have an attitude of service to all of those around us, and C, to tell the truth. Thank you so much.